Thank you, Marcy. Good morning, everyone, or I guess it's afternoon at this point. It is my pleasure to introduce R.J. Mangan as our speaker on this very blustery, as Marcy said, day. I noticed everybody, myself included, those of us with longer hair, came in the door and went right to the restroom because otherwise it was scary. R.J. is relatively new to the Youngstown Diocese, having assumed the position of Peace and Justice in July of 2022. Originally from the Philadelphia area, he is a graduate of St. Vincent College in Latrobe. He earned a master's in theological studies from Boston College. He has extensive experience in history, the arts, discipleship, and a very special interest in moral theology. And he was teaching in Philadelphia when he saw the post for the Peace and Justice position here in Youngstown, and it was his dream job. So I'm not too sure how many people find their dream jobs in Youngstown, Ohio, but we're glad that he found his. So what exactly does the Office of Peace and Justice do? Well, I think one of the reasons RJ is here today is to share that with us. But I'm going to read a quote from the diocesan press release when he was hired. And I think that this sort of sums it up. RJ will assume overall responsibility for developing programs and specialized outreach to engage parishes and other Catholic institutions with themes of Catholic social teaching, legislative advocacy and public policy, human trafficking, racism, diversity and inclusion, and other issues concerning the sanctity of human life and the dignity of the human person. He is the link between parishes and the diocese to work together on these many social issues that are important to all of us. And I believe you also have a new position, you told me that. The Director of Pro-Life Activities for the diocese. So I think he has a lot on his plate. So I'd like to welcome RJ on behalf of the First Friday Club.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, and thank you so much for having me. Thanks to the First Friday Club of Greater Youngstown. Thanks to that anonymous sponsor for sponsoring my talk here today. And I really do want this to be a conversation. This is a complex topic. I mean, Catholic perspectives on social structures and their impact. Doesn't that just sound riveting? No. I understand. Most people have a cursory kind of experience with sociology. And the question really becomes, what does sociology have to do with theology? What does sociology and the study of society have to do with our lives as Christians, with our lives as Catholics and followers of Christ? So kind of just to jump right in, there's that term, building a beloved community. Of course, that was a favorite phrase of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who was actually a big inspiration for my work, along with Archbishop Desmond Tutu. But in addition to that, of course, Pope St. John Paul II and Pope Francis helped to really form kind of the basis for my interest in theology in the first place, and my desire to help build that beloved community in the world to the best of the ability that I can. So just jumping right in, if we wouldn't mind moving forward. Thank you. Alrighty. So this is the fundamental question that I had to ask. And specifically, I'm holding up here my master's thesis. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you, I promise. Who here has done research, academic, or otherwise? Yes, fantastic. How many of you realize that after you wrote it, this doesn't make sense to anybody who's not already involved in the field? Yes, exactly. It ends up being super dense. And that is a very complex question, even though it's both obvious and obscure, right? We have this, we all experience society. We're all a part of it. As a matter of fact, we can't help but be in it. Regardless of whether or not you are born in Kenya, or you're born in India, Russia, United States, France, etc., you have a mother and a father. You have at least that fundamental society. Excuse me. And although we can look around ourselves and we hear people talk about the economy, we hear people talk about poverty, we hear people talk about these large nebulous ideas of these problems that are affecting society. But it becomes very, very difficult to describe them, to actually be able to pin down and put meat on the bones of these abstract and cerebral ideas and actually make that practical. And actually, that's what I'm here kind of to talk about today, being able to talk about social structures, not just as this idea that exists in our head, as something that we talk about but doesn't really exist. No, rather, I'm here to talk about social structures as ontologically real beings themselves. That our social relationships themselves gain a generative autonomy, which impacts us and impacts our decisions. Now, there's going to be more on that. So let's jump right in, why don't we? Next slide, thank you. So, thank you very much. So central points of discussion, here we are. Starting from the top and going around, and I don't have them numbered because they're all in a confluence with one another. It is an organic combination. It is a simultaneity. There is no separating each one of these from each other. They all happen together. So first and foremost, social structures and social systems, describing those, defining them. Secondly, individual agency and institutional power and how those interact in the confluence of the chain of relation. And then lastly, social sin and social justice. It's interesting, Pope St. John Paul II was the first one to use the phrase social sin, who's also the first one to use the phrase culture of death. And I don't think that's a coincidence. He recognized in communism a social system which was promoting evil. And he worked much of his life to affect that. Now, of course, if we can recognize a particular economic system as promoting certain evils, well, how exactly does that work? How do we find that line from the line from the dictates of Joseph Stalin down to the average conscript in the Russian army? So we can step forward from here. Thank you very much. Alrighty, so first things first, let's define a social structure. Does anybody have a good definition of what a social structure is? We all kind of have this innate gut feeling as to what a social structure is, but I'll give you a definition. And it can be a little recursive. It's going to tell you a whole lot. A social structure from a critical realist perspective, which is, by the way, the foundation, the sociological foundation of my work. A social structure is a system of social relations among pre-existing social positions. Now, well, what does that mean? Well, a social position is fundamentally some established identity in society. I mean, we all experience different social positions throughout our lives. As for myself, I am a son, I am a brother, I am a Christian, I'm a Catholic, I am an employee, and if you start going through, you can start seeing these different social positions that we occupy at different times in our lives. And those social positions are always defined by rules, and so not only cultural systems, but material systems as well, our material relationships with one another. So interestingly enough, Margaret S. Archer, who wrote the realist social theory, really kind of founded a new metaphysical understanding of sociology. So really breaking into that, what does that mean? Previous to the 90s, there was not a unified sociological theory. As a matter of fact, sociology was founded on both positivist and nominalist philosophies, which essentially means that they did not presuppose a universal truth. They presupposed truths within aggregate behaviors, as in you can only see and observe the aggregate behaviors of humankind over the course of time. You can't make value judgments. Now, of course, that itself is insufficient and contradictory. We as human beings, And interestingly enough, the sociologists themselves of the 19th and 20th century proved that it was impossible to not make value judgments. Max Weber, John C. Hohmann, and several other individuals, and Collins. There's a lot of them who ultimately they created this subjective covering law model, which they said did not create any value judgments, but nonetheless, Europe is definitely the most advanced civilization. So interestingly enough, they used that kind of covering law model to justify things like imperialism and colonization. And really being able to recognize the idea of an alethic account of being, this idea that there is a universal truth, and there are multiple paradigms competing with each other in order to approximate that truth. That's critical realism in a nutshell. It's this idea that social structures really are objectively real, that they are something which can be defined and actually do in fact have both a good and an evil. There's actually a spectrum from which we can say this is a good social system, this is a bad social system. Or at the very least, we're capable of beginning to define it. So fundamentally, social structures are built on relationships. Every single social structure, whether that be one based on business, whether that one be based on faith, etc. Now, material systems directly, we understand those as resource-to-resource relations. Those are the necessities of food. I mean, that's a very basic one. I need to eat in order to survive. Thus, I must find a way in order to obtain food. That is a fundamental relationship that I must then go out, find someone who either makes food, learn how to make food myself from someone who already knows how to do that. That is a very fundamental material system. Now, of course, let's give a definition of culture to make it a little bit more clear. Actually, as is it the excuse me? It was Pope Paul VI who defines culture as the different styles of life, multiple scales of values arise from the diverse manner of using things, of laboring, of expressing oneself, of practicing religion, of forming customs, of establishing laws and juridic institutions, of cultivating the sciences, the arts, and beauty. Its cultural systems are all of those things that arise both in conjunction with material realities. For example, excuse me. For example, grapes tend to grow very well in the Mediterranean. Thus, a culture of wine production tended to result from that. Whereas in China, sorghum is a much easier grain to produce, and thus is turned into baijiu. And so you have a culture of distillation that appeared throughout China rather than trying to ferment as wine might be fermented, and how that actually impacts people's relationships there. So, and of course, wine is a perfect example. There's regulations around what percentage of alcohol that has to be. There's regulations about who you can sell it to. There's regulations about where and when you can sell it. And that's actually been in existence for many, many years. But kind of moving from there, these material systems and cultural systems have a generative capacity to alter the individual themselves. And the individual has the capacity to alter the system. This is social conditioning. Those material systems and cultural systems which surround us ultimately condition, to a degree, the human will, the human agency. Excuse me. But the best way to actually provide a basis for making truth claims within a critical realist model, you have to have statistical and demographic analysis. You need to have data. And so it's trying to take sociology and kind of make it into a more hard science than it was before. But moving forward from there. Finally, the structuring process, which is what Margaret S. Archer was talking about, and is the foundation for being able to identify really the process of social relations, is this structuring process. And once again, I put these all side by side because they all happen together. We define them, but they're all happening at the same time. You have emergence, interplay, and outcome. Excuse me. Emergence is the spontaneous generation or transformation of a relationship through the human will, individually or corporately, based on material, agential, personal, and or cultural resources that are present to the actors involved. As such, these relationships are emergent properties which are generated from natural necessity among individual agents or groups in those systems that I previously described. And this emergence does not happen independent of any society or any existence, right? This emergence happens from the antecedent. As Archer says, society is purely an unintended consequence of human relationships. That the current antecedent, the current social milieu, is the result of prior social interaction. There's simply no avoiding that. And what's interesting is you have either in this emergence, you have new relationships that arise. Maybe something happens, such as the invention of an entirely new economic system, such as capitalism or communism, which then people are introduced to this new idea. It causes new relationships to occur. There's an interplay between the individuals and organizations within a society. And then there's an outcome. Either society and social structures are reproduced as they were before, leading to morphostasis, literally the stasis of the body, the continuation of what is, or morphogenesis, where social structures and organizations are modified by the individuals within them. However, I do want to hammer this home. Archer proposes that there are internal and necessary relations between the parts and the whole of a society, meaning that social structures and their components can be understood as existing outside of any current agent. So in this sense, Marx and Engels may have wrote the Communist Manifesto. Marx and Engels could not control the idea of communism after they had passed away. It was picked up and taken upon by multiple other individuals. It's this idea that ended up getting legs. It got a life of its own. So, we can kind of move forward on that. So individual agency and institutional power, that chain of relations, the generative autonomy. And I don't really want to drone on about this too much more. But just as an example, we have this chain of relations that we have between us. Jeffrey H. Hodgson is an institutional economist who discusses this rather directly. Hodgson defines the term social position as a specified social relationship with other individuals or social positions, which is essentially the same as how Douglas V. Purpura has defined it. It consists of a variety of social roles, such as a doctor and a patient, teacher and student, mother and father, etc., as I've described. But these social relationships are defined by rules. So the rules that frame social interaction can be understood as a learned and mutually understood injunction or disposition that in circumstance X do Y. In turn, do Y must be interpreted broadly to include prohibitions as well as obligations. So there is constitutive power in relationships where we establish a set of rules, either in a relationship of domination or cooperation. There are incisive powers in institutions and individuals, which essentially constrict or encourage particular different behaviors according to the systems that exist. And then finally, excuse me. My apologies, I lost my spot. Norms of behavior, social conventions. Yes. I apologize, I lost my spot. Anyway, in that chain of relations, so essentially, Hodgson recognizes that the cultural system of a society will create the bounds in which its social structures, institutions, and organizations arise or motivated. In a morphogenetic sense, this interpretation of ideas is one major factor of the emergent properties of human agency. However, it must be pointed out that human agency is not obliterated in the face of social conditioning. As a matter of fact, we have multiple cases throughout history where human beings have risen above their social conditions, their socioeconomic conditions, to promote the common good, to do something greater, and to change their society for the better. And so, excuse me. looking at this, we can then understand, we can kind of take this process and break down different parts of society, different social structures, be that the family, the economy, the Catholic Church. As a whole, it is very much a meta theory on how we define things. Now, of course, with my work particularly, I focused on the economic ethics of abortion in the United States. I focused particularly on how women, particularly, are both constricted from having children, are enticed towards abortion because of socioeconomic pressures, and actually being able to define abortion not just as an individual sin, but as a social sin, as something which impacts all of us. Because social sin is much deeper than just a personal sin. We're all very familiar with that, so we can step forward, and we're almost done. Apologies. How much time do I have? All right. Okay, fantastic. So jumping from here, looking at now social sin, social justice, the Catholic social teaching side of these things. By the way, the sociology I've been talking about directly comes from people like Daniel K. Finn, Daniel Daly, and various other Catholic theologians that are involved in this work. But we can now apply a moral lens to this understanding of social structures. If we take our human dignity seriously and the common good, and I do want to kind of give a definition, what is human dignity? Does anybody have a good answer? It's actually very straightforward. It's the Imago Dei. It's the Imago Dei. It's our being made in the image and likeness of God. It is an infinite pricelessness, which imparts upon us a multitude of rights and obligations, which have been recognized by the popes and by various other church fathers, doctors, etc. Excuse me. In a particular sense, although not an exhaustive one, this presence of God is his unconditional love for all humanity, individually, regardless of age, sex, ethnicity, mental or physical ability, accident of birth, etc. Even when a person has grievously sinned, who has disregarded their innate value and that of others, the Lord loves the human person and works for their salvation. In fact, the faith professes that such is God's love, that he gave his only begotten Son, Jesus Christ, over to sin and death in order to redeem all humankind through the outpouring of his sacred blood on the cross. This love of God, which fashioned humanity and sustains it, is the fundamental relationship we participate in as human beings. When I tell you that we can't exist without relationship, it's because we can't exist without God. And that fundamental relationship, our capacity for God, our human dignity, is what helps define us and defines our society. If we have social systems designed to promote the human dignity, to promote people's capacity for the good, for God, the sum total conditions which can promote human flourishing and development, the common good, then we will find ourselves on a proper path. We can find social conditioning for the virtuous rather than for sin. Now, actually, as F. Russell Hittinger beautifully summarizes current doctrine about humanity right here. What exists simply in God is communicated to creatures in a multiform manner. First, a diversity of created things, each having a good according to its participated being. Second, a diversity of created things imitating God insofar as they cause goodness in others. Fundamentally, and I don't want to drag on too much about this, but looking into Christian justice and solidarity in all of this is the call to love fully, to love completely, to love unconditionally, to love to such a degree that you're willing to put down your life for your friends. And that's difficult. That's not easy. It's complex. But if we're going to take that very seriously, that means that we can't only look to what we ourselves are doing. We cannot only look to our personal sins, to our personal mistakes and inabilities, but we must look towards all of society. Now, granted, that doesn't mean that everybody should be concerned about the state of affairs at all times. By all means, please don't go home and rip your hair out about the fact that the economy is falling apart or something. No, that's not what this is about. The point is to bring an awareness of the fact that there are certain things which are encouraged by our economic system, by our healthcare system, by the way that we simply run this country, which incline us towards sin. And we would not be alone in this, not at all. Phenomenal examples of structural social sin would be Maoist communist China, where they had anti-religious policies, which were only lifted in the 1980s, and really were still yet to be totally overcome. And that has led to a massive devastation in terms of morality and community within China. Just another example would be apartheid in South Africa. It was a cultural system and a material system which both harmed the black Africans of South Africa and the white Africans of South Africa. It was something that Archbishop Desmond Tutu made very clear. I love this quote from him. He told his congregation, "Please be kind to white folk. They need you more than they could ever know." And it's very true that the people who perpetrate evil are themselves injured by it. That those who perpetrate evil, even if they do so under coercion, I'd actually say even more so, if they are coerced to do so, against even their own better judgment, against their own conscience, they feel that they have no other choice, or they feel that they themselves can make no difference. But looking towards Christian justice and solidarity, when we talk about Christian justice, we follow the Thomistic definition. We give to each other what is owed to each other, according to our human dignity. And that must apply on a social level as well. That's what the church means by social justice, is that we promote the good of all persons with a perseverance and a commitment to the common good in the face of adversity. That's solidarity. And solidarity is, in effect, the cure to social sin. It is the cure to social injustice. And it is how we create social justice. It's only by walking with others and by entering into their lives, by encountering them as Christ, that we can actually come to understand them, learn more about ourselves, and most fundamentally, learn who God is and what he is calling us to do. As on Christian justice and solidarity, if any man, woman, or child suffers, Christ suffers with them through his passion, death, and resurrection. And as Christ suffers, so too the body of Christ, which is the church. Thus the church suffers with all the afflicted in the world and offers up their sufferings to the Lord for the sake of the world. As well, the suffering one, the one to whom the Christian is called to bring healing as a witness to the gospel, is none other than Christ himself. For who is Christ? Amen, I say to you, whatever you did for one of these least brothers of mine, you did for me. Excuse me. So, according to Pope John Paul II, he talks about these structures of sin. Of course, he's specifically talking about communism more often than not when he talks about a structure of sin. But he also talks about a culture of death, this idea that human life has lost some of its intrinsic value. And I think that's made very evident today look at the news, right? There's been a devaluation of human life. There has been this culture of death, which has encouraged people to throw their own and others' lives away for the sake of pleasure, for the sake of an ephemeral and fleeting happiness. That, to me, is not a Christian society. One that lets people fall through the cracks and actually encourages people to fall through the cracks so that we don't have to pay for them. Excuse me. So fundamentally, the concern of solidarity for the promotion of human dignity of all of our brothers and sisters extends to every social structure or social relation from the individual. Now, finally, as I want to wrap up here, unfortunately, we know humanity is not perfect. Sin, personal, societal, and structural, and I've talked about a couple of examples of those. According to the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace, sin is a mystery composed of a twofold wound, which the sinner opens in his own side and in the relationship with his neighbor. That is why we can speak of personal and social sin. every human act is social because of the fact that the person who acts is always acting in relationship with a person or a number of persons, themselves, God, or other human beings. As such, the human dignity must be central to all sectors of social life. If a social union therein is to produce goods in and for its members. If a human dignity is not respected in a social entity, then it is apt to produce sin socially by the personal sins of its members. So, we'll finish here, applying the concept. The economy, on a fundamental level. Markets and prices. Markets are a constitutive power. They give rules, regulations that surround those markets and prices. Just for example, here we are. As Jeffrey Hodgson says, the definition of capitalism is a social system. There's number one, a legal system supporting widespread individual rights and liberty to own, buy, and sell private property. 2, widespread commodity exchange in markets involving money. 3, widespread private ownership of the means of production by firms producing goods or services for sale and the pursuit of profit. 4, much of production organized separately and apart from the home and the family. And 5, widespread wage labor and employment contracts. 6, a developed financial system with banking institutions, the widespread use of credit with property as collateral, and the selling of debt. Reading into the Interrupting Capitalism from Matthew Shattle, and reading Institutional Economics, Conceptualizing Capitalism from Jeffrey H. Hodgson, you come to the realization that unfettered capitalism leads purposefully and unequivocally to generational poverty. There has to be regulations on the capability of people to buy and sell as they so choose, and it seems to be that we are pushing towards, and specifically in the case, and I point out the economy, but lastly, opportunities, investments. You'll see these all represent those 3 things I was talking about: material systems, cultural systems, and human agency. As we all know, not everybody is going to be blessed with the same opportunities and the same ability to invest in themselves or to invest in a career. That is one of the, I guess, self-defeating aspects of poverty, right? That by definition, you have less of an opportunity compared to somebody who was born into more. And that doesn't necessarily mean that wealth is bad, right? It doesn't mean that private property is bad. That is not what I'm saying at all. No, we have a right to private property, we have a right to pursue our own happiness, but we also have a right to fair wages, to just labor, to maternity leave and paternity leave. We have a right to our families. We have a right to spend time with them. We have a right to build up our homes and our communities. And looking at the data, it has been proven to me, at the very least, that there is a distinct social issue right before us that takes place on a regular basis all around us. The distribution of healthcare benefits, which I'm not sure if you know, but from my own data that I have here, on average it costs $40,000 to give birth in a hospital. Imagine you don't have insurance. On average, it costs somewhere between $250,000 to $850,000 to raise a child over the course of 1 to 18. Mothers are being priced out of motherhood. And the question of how we solve that is up to all of us, in both policy and in practice, in both love and in times of hardship. We must have compassion for one another, and especially those who we feel are opposing the good. Because most frequently, and in my experience, everyone is trying for the good. More often than not. There are some bad actors, that's always the case. But more often than not, people are trying for the good. And it's up to us to be able to work with one another, to emerge, to have an interplay, to have an outcome that benefits the common good, all people, regardless of race, color, ethnicity, mental state, physical ability, etc., etc. Thank you very much. I'm going to leave off there.
So I know we have some time for for questions from the crowd. So I'm going to be the person that walks the microphone around. So if anybody has a question, I'll walk to you.
Thank you for a thoughtful presentation, and I appreciate your research. Good luck
Thank you very
with
much.
that. So, as the newly appointed Director of Peace and Justice, are you anticipating starting any new programs or addressing any areas that haven't been addressed so far in the diocese?
Yes, so actually I have been running a series of immigration town halls. I'm working with our Director of Hispanic Ministry, Christina Hernandez, and various other individuals from the community to address immigrants in our community and immigration in general, as it seems to be it is going to be very difficult come January for a lot of individuals, and being able to assist the community in whatever way, shape, or form we can, and protecting the human dignity of individuals regardless of whether or not they're undocumented. Besides that, I am looking towards actually trying to get a diocesan bus, possibly for next year, as it is a little late now. But looking in the far future, getting diocesan buses down to the March for Life in both Columbus and in Washington D.C. I'm looking towards trying to promote and create a work group for advocacy, and for our diocese, having individuals from across the diocese, preferably, to be able to go to Columbus, to be able to promote the common good, to be able to promote Catholic ideals, both at the state and nationally, hopefully. Besides, well, interestingly enough, it is a little bit of lobbying, but it's on issues specifically. It's not for political campaigns. It's not for a candidate. So there's a distinct difference, because we have to be issues based. Otherwise, we will lose lose our tax exempt status. But besides that, there is also the Faith and Family Festival. Of course, I'm hoping to get engaged with more of our colleges, and with more of our youth, to try to bring them closer to the church, especially since so many folks in Gen Z and Gen Z are socially minded, and I think there is just a massive dearth in there's a massive dearth in the information available on what the Catholic Church really teaches about society and what we really do to promote the common good. That there's unfortunately a lot of bad PR that we're working against, and we've been working against that since the 1700s. So, but I hope that answers the question.
I have a question. I'm here.
Oh, there we are.
So, given that you had, we'll go into a fantasy question here. Given that you had all the power and resources you needed, what social construct would you attack and change?
Well, that's a big one.
Good one, Hal.
Honestly, that is a very tough question. I mean, fundamentally, there are there's a lot of economic justice that needs to be done, which, in my personal opinion, if you can construct your markets and you have regulations which promote the common good for the economy, a lot of other issues will fall into place, because that is one of the, I would say, probably the most fundamental issue, at least specifically nowadays. Maybe in the past there'd be something else. Other than that, healthcare. So economy, healthcare, those would be the top two.
I see a real need for a group of volunteers to be trained to help people fight through the immigration system. There are a great many people who have come here legally. They've been here for years, and yet our immigration system is set up in such a way that they can't get through it.
It's broken.
So I would suggest a training program for volunteers to work with immigrants to fight through that mess.
Thank you very much.
Well, actually, my question piggybacks sort of Ray's. What I would think the two biggest issues as we go into the new year, changes administration, that are going to impact the populations that we're most concerned with would be medical, healthcare, and immigration. Well, here we are in Youngstown, Ohio, and as Ray said, I'm sure that there's paperwork and things that we can do to help immigrants. How about healthcare? I mean, is there anything we could do at the grassroots level to alleviate some of the great injustice?
Yes, to a degree, absolutely. In terms of healthcare, there, of course, is what Catholic Charities provides in terms of, there's basic necessities, because there's a lot of basic necessities that make up the fundamentals of healthcare in the sense of keeping people at the base level, not necessarily treatment. Beyond that, promoting the opening of clinics, free clinics, promoting the opening and promoting particularly policies on the state level for both public family planning and specifically increasing, of course, the child tax credit, those kinds of things. But there is a deep need for a national for national reforms on these issues, because the states themselves don't really have the infrastructure, at least nowadays, in light of the modern bureaucratic state, of the administrative state, and everything that's handled by it. They simply do not have the infrastructure to manage healthcare for the entire nation. And so there has to be major reforms, which it's a good question of how do we accomplish that. I don't exactly know. Run for office.
I'm listening to what you're saying, and I'm just thinking about healthcare, and you're talking about the future. Maybe we need to go back to building Catholic hospitals in our communities. That was the best healthcare average people ever got, as far as I'm concerned.
Still is, by the way. But yeah, no, it's good. Yes, right. The biggest issue, actually, hospitals generally are struggling with right now is a dearth of doctors and physicians and nurses. There's a massive lack in terms of human capital to fill those positions and to fill those hospitals. We could build a hospital, but we wouldn't have any doctors to put in it.
You talked about the economic structure of society. Compare that to the hierarchical structure of the church.
Alrighty, so no, that's really good. Ultimately, we have our rules and regulations. As there is material systems to the Catholic Church. Of course, there are. We have our local parishes. We have our Knights of Columbus. We have organizations such as St. Vincent de Paul. There's very much a material reality. On a cultural side of things, our rules and our regulations come in the form of sacred scripture, sacred tradition, and the magisterium. That over the course of time, and actually I think the ecumenical councils are a perfect example of this idea of emergence, interplay, and outcome, because let's take Arius, for example. People started questioning, what does it mean to say that Christ is the Son of God? Is he consubstantial with the Father, or was he made by the Father as a creature similar to us, but slightly above us, as Arius would have promoted? Of course, that was determined to be a heresy, but that only happened as a result of the conversation getting large enough, wide enough, for the bishops to be able to determine that we need to have a council to determine what the proper teaching is. And that's what's interesting. There are times where you will have morphogenesis. You will have times where the church makes alterations in the doctrine, in the teaching. And then there's morphostasis, some things that absolutely will never change, those dogmas, such as Christ is the Son of God, Mary is the Mother of God, etc. In looking at the church in that sense, we have a respect particularly for subsidiarity, which is which is this belief that we cannot have respect for the dignity of the human person without respect for local, family, individual relations. That where a problem arises, it should be addressed there first, on that level. And only if it can't be addressed at the level at which it arises, should it really go up to let's say your parish priest, or to your bishop, or to the Pope, and the Synod of Bishops. I would need to spend a lot more time kind of delineating all the various parts of the Catholic Church, because of the fact that it is a 2,000-year-old institution. It is easily, I would say, the oldest surviving social structure from Roman times, except possibly the 10 Tables of Roman law, which are still used today. But that we are properly the Catholic Church, that it hasn't changed. That we are, although we are a product of the past, we are still in continuity with the future, if that makes any sense. Sorry. I'm not sure if there's anything else you wanted to hear on that. I would need to explore that a lot more. That's a good question.
Is it working? Okay. I have maybe a last question. You're our last speaker in 2024, and we'll start a whole new year in 2025. Can you tell us maybe about a new or maybe existing program or initiative that you are looking out for in 2025, even if it's an existing, it doesn't have to be new, that you're overseeing from the diocese that maybe you can, like a highlight, a program or activity that you're going to be working on?
Well, of course, it's the 50th anniversary of the Rice Bowl. So that's a big one. It is the 50th anniversary of CRS Rice Bowl. I actually have, of Operation Rice Bowl, as it's called, I have a personal connection with that. It actually started in the Diocese of Youngstown, the Diocese of Allentown, where I grew up and am originally from. Started there in 1973. That's a big one. And really hoping for folks to really promote that and get engaged with it, because most people don't know this, but Catholic Relief Services is in more countries than most other charitable organizations in the world. We still have people in Afghanistan. We still have people in Lebanon. We still have people in Syria, regardless of the socio-political situations happening. The Catholic Church, specifically the American Catholic Church through CRS, is there to provide food, to provide care, and to provide the love of Christ. That's a huge one. Besides that, of course, I will always pitch the prison and jail ministry. We are always looking for more volunteers. I'm the coordinator for the prison and jail ministry as well. We're always looking for more volunteers. There's letter writing ministry opportunities. There's the Colby Gathering, which is a gathering for people who are either people who were formerly incarcerated themselves or their families. As a matter of fact, I'm running Colby Gathering tonight at St. Peter and Paul Church over in Youngstown, Holy Apostles Parish, from 6 to 7 p.m. And outside of that, there is, of course, the Mass for Life happening January 19th. There is February 9th is the White Mass. So those are the events coming up. Thank you so much.
RJ, thank you so much. That was enlightening. And thank you for not reading your whole dissertation. I appreciate that. So,
If you want it, I'm more than happy to send it.
thank you all so much for coming today. I wish you all a very happy Advent, blessed Christmas, wonderful New Year, and we will see you on January 9th. Remember, second Thursday of January for Greg Wazinski. Please, safe home. Hopefully nobody blows home today. But I hope you all stay warm, stay safe, and know that you're in our prayers. Thank you all so much.